Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to the next part in this unofficial series of how to play Warhammer 40k 7th edition.
We play and call it work.
In this episode, we are going to talk about the psychic phase. The psychic phase is very important in the game as it represents different psykers harnessing the powers of the warp to throw them at their enemies or bless their allies and buff themselves, and can really change how the game is played. So let's take a look at how this phase works. When we speak of psykers, there are actually three different definitions of psykers. I'm only showing two here because the third one you are rarely going to see. The first one is basically any model with the special rule psyker, such as the Space Marine Librarian on the left. Another type of psyker is called a brotherhood of psykers, such as these Grey Knights on the right. They are individually psykers, but they operate as a unit, so the unit counts as essentially one psyker for all intents and purposes for the rules. They do operate a little different when it comes to if bad things happen. For example, perils of the warp can hurt models that try to manifest psychic powers, and with brotherhoods of the psykers it could affect any of them, but we'll get over that. We'll cover that when we actually get to that point. The third type of psyker is a psychic pilot. These used to be more common with the Grey Knights, and you had some with the Eldar as well, but we don't see them nearly as much anymore. It's essentially a vehicle that counts as a psyker. This is different than a psyker who is transported inside of a vehicle. We're not going to cover that one in this video because you're rarely going to see it, and really it operates pretty similarly to just a single psyker. Every psyker, or brotherhood of psykers, has a mastery level. And pretty much all the codices are up to date to tell you what this mastery level is, but if you don't see what it is in a codex, you just assume it's the number of powers that it knows. But you really don't have to worry about that too much, because for the most part it'll tell you that it's a psyker mastery level 1, 2, 3, and sometimes, but rarely, even level 4. The mastery level represents how powerful a psyker it is, but it actually has a practical application in the actual game. First off, the mastery level represents roughly how many powers a psyker will know. Now, it's possible for a psyker to know more than his mastery level, as we're going to talk about when we talk about picking and generating your psychic powers. It also tells you how many powers can be used each turn. Now, the rule book isn't super clear about this part, and so it's more something that is agreed on in a lot of house rules. But if you're mastery level 2, for example, the rule book says that your mastery level determines how many psychic powers you can use per turn, but it doesn't ever explicitly say that your mastery level is equal to how many you can use per turn. But most tournaments and unofficial FAQs will say that whatever your mastery level is, that is how many psychic powers that particular psyker can use per psychic phase. Before a game begins, you need to generate the psychic powers that each of your psykers knows. This is generally done by using things like this psychic power deck that you can get through Games Workshop. They should still be available, but thankfully all of the information is in your related rulebook and codices. The rulebook contains all of the main psychic disciplines, and then if your particular race knows a different discipline, that will be available in your codex. To generate a power, or the powers that your psyker knows, assuming that your codex entry doesn't already explicitly state what he knows, you simply roll some d6s. Every psychic discipline has powers ranging from number 1 to number 6. This isn't necessarily in order of power. Some of them are better when they're number 1 or number 2. It's just more how they are organized. On top of that, every psychic discipline has a Primaris power, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Let's assume that you have a psyker level 2. Then what you do first is you take one of your dice and you say which discipline you're going to be rolling for. Now, it'll say in your codex entry what disciplines you can choose from, but let's assume that you have access to all the ones in the rulebook. So let's say I want to roll for biomancy first. So then I'd roll a d6. In this case, I rolled a 5. And then I could choose, do I want the number 5 power for biomancy, or I could replace it with the Primaris power. But I have to make that decision before I roll another die. So if I keep the 5, let's say I decide to roll for Biomancy a second time. If I were to roll a 5 again, I get to re-roll that until I roll something other than what I already know. And then I could once again choose to replace it with the Primaris if I didn't already do so. Now, on top of that, if all of your powers are generated from the same psychic discipline, then you don't actually need to replace any with the Primaris power because you automatically get to know it. This is called Psychic Focus. So if I roll both of my powers, or if I only had one power, Mastery Level 1 will always get Psychic Focus because they're always rolling all of their powers from the same discipline. And that is nice because you get access to the Primaris. But let's say I wanted one from Biomancy, so I got number 3, and I decided to keep that one, and one from Divination, and I got number 4. I could replace that with the Primaris from Divination. Then I would not get access to Psychic Focus because I rolled on more than one discipline. Furthermore, if a unit, a Psyker, is equipped with a Force weapon, which I'm not going to go into details exactly what that does, you can look in the rulebook, then the Psyker automatically knows the Force Psychic power. This does not stop them from getting the Primaris power from Psychic Focus if they roll all their powers on the same discipline. Let's go through a sample Psychic phase. We're going to assume that is the Space Marine turn. Right here we have a Space Marine Librarian. We're going to make him a level 2 Librarian. That gets determined based on how you upgrade him and everything, but let's just assume he's level 2. And that he's taken all of his powers from Biomancy, so he knows 2 Biomancy powers plus his Primaris power, because he automatically gains Psychic Focus for having generated all his powers from the same one. And he also knows Force because he has a Force weapon. He will be accompanied by a squad of Tactical Marines, but he will not join them. On the other side, we have an Orc Weird Boy, level 1 Psyker, joining a group of Orc Boys with a knob. So the first thing we need to do is generate our warp charges, which is wonderfully random, as the warp loves to be random. The way that we do this is we take a single die, we roll it. In this case, we rolled a 1. And both sides then add the total number of mastery levels from all of their Psykers. In this case, we only have 1 Psyker on each side, so it's pretty easy. The Space Marine side will have a total of 3 dice, the 1 plus the 2 mastery level. And the Orc side will have 2 dice, the 1 that I rolled, plus the 1 from the Weird Boy. We'll represent this by putting 3 dice by the Librarian and 2 dice by the Orcs. Now, the dice on the Orc side will only be used to try to stop psychic powers from going through. And even if there were no Psykers on that side, they would still have the minimum of 1 that I rolled to try to deny the Witch, as it is called, which is trying to stop psychic powers from happening. The next part that we go through is we try to manifest psychic powers. We do this by first selecting a Psyker, Space Marine Librarian. We then choose a power. Let's choose Smite. Smite is its Primaris power that actually acts like a shooting attack. And then we choose a target if necessary. And most psychic powers will have a target. In this case, because it's a shooting attack, clearly the only option I have is the Orcs, because I can't shoot at my own guys. I then try to manifest this power. So a lot of things can go wrong here, but what I basically look at is the warp charge requirement of the power. Smite has a warp charge requirement of 1. So I need to have 1 successful die roll. In order to get a successful die roll, I have to roll 4 or higher on a single die. However, if I want to up my chances, I could take more than 1 dice. All I have to do is take my pool of warp charges and decide how many dice am I going to use to try to get Smite. I'm going to pick up 2 dice because I want to save the other one for maybe another psychic power. I then roll these 2 dice, and the number of successful warp charges that I generate is equal to how many times I roll 4 or higher on these dice. So let's see how I do. In this case I failed. I'm going to pretend that I got a 6 and a 1 because I want to show you denying the Witch. So I have 1 successful roll, in which case this power does go off because it requires a minimum of 1. However, now the Orcs can try to stop this power from going through. In order to do this, they need to roll a number of 6s equal to however many successes I got. I got 1 success, so they need to roll 1 6 plus. However, there are some modifiers to this dice roll. Because they have a Psyker in their group, they get to add 1 to their die rolls. So they don't just need to roll a 6 plus, they just need to roll a 5 plus. There are other modifiers as well, such as if they have the special rule Adamantium Will, they get a further +1. And if their Psyker is better than my Psyker, they get to add a further 1. increasing it to a possible 4+. In this case, they just get a +1. They really don't want to get hit by this, so they're going to use both their dice and try to roll a single 5+, which they fail to do. That means the psychic power goes off. At this point, we resolve the psychic power. In this case, Smite is simply a shooting attack with a range of 18 inches. Clearly, I'm within 18 inches. It's strength 4, armor penetration value of 2, and it has 4 shots. This then becomes just a regular shooting attack. I take the ballistic skill of the psyker who fired it, in this case is 4, and I roll my 4 dice, hit on 3s. I get 2 successes. Then strength 4 against their toughness 4. If you look that up in the to wound chart, you know that you need 4 pluses. I got 2 successes. And then normally you take your cover saves or armor saves or invulnerable saves. Now this particular one is AP2, so it ignores all armor saves. So 2 of these orc boys would be removed as casualties, just as if they were shot at by a weapon with that profile. Now that that is done, I move on. I can choose a different psyker, the same psyker, or I can just say I'm done. It's totally up to me. But I want to try to cast one more thing. Let's try to manifest Iron Arm. Iron Arm is a Warp Charge 1 power that can only target the psyker itself. It can't bless anybody else. This is a blessing, so he has to target himself. In this case, he needs to get 1 successful roll, and if he does, then he will get +3 to his strength and his toughness, because that is what Iron Arm does. Let's see if he succeeds. He does not. So he fails to manifest Iron Arm. Now there's one other thing that could go wrong when you're manifesting, and that is called Perils of the Warp. Perils of the Warp occurs when you roll 2 or more dice to try to manifest, and you roll at least 2 6s. The power will still manifest, but something horribly wrong can go on first. In this case, we need to roll on the Perils of the Warp table before the enemy even tries to deny the witch. And even if they end up denying the witch afterwards, the result of the Perils of the Warp will still happen. Now I'm not going to go through all the different results, but essentially you're going to roll a d6 and compare it to the table and apply that result before we move on to trying to deny the witch and resolving the power. Even if the result kills your psyker, you still get to manifest the power if the enemy fails to deny the witch, even if it's a shooting attack. It's really strange because it could actually result in him being dead and then you having a shooting attack, but just assume that he's where he was before, makes the power, fires the power, and then is removed. Let's talk about the different types of psychic powers that you could manifest. We're assuming that you don't have an old codex where it just has its own rules. We're going to use just the ones from the main rulebook or new codices as well. The first type is a blessing. A blessing can only be targeted on a friendly unit, such as a Space Marine Librarian casting something like Endurance, which gives Feel No Pain and helps them to survive longer, on the Tactical Marines. A blessing can always be cast on the Psyker himself. Now, some blessings will specify who they can or cannot target. A lot of blessings will say the Psyker, that targets the Psyker, or it'll say targets a single friendly unit within 24 inches. The Psyker has to have line of sight and has to be able to cast that power just using all the normal rules. The second type is a Malediction. A Malediction is much like a blessing in that it just targets a unit, but in this case you target a enemy unit. For example, the telepathy power Terrify is a Warp Charge 1 Malediction that targets a single enemy unit within 24 inches. While that power is in effect, the enemy would have -1 leadership and treats everybody as having the Fear special rule, which we're not going to talk about what that does. It's a universal special rule that does nasty stuff to you in close combat. And on top of that, at the end of the psychic phase, they have to take a morale check or fall back. And so that is an example of a Malediction. Now, a Malediction, just like anything else, can be denied, especially if you're targeting where a Psyker is, then he'll get those bonuses. The next type of power is Conjuration. This is usually the realm of Chaos Demons and Chaos Space Marines, but other codices do have access to it as well. Conjuration is used to summon in a new unit that was not there before, such as this unit of Pink Horrors. These usually arrive by the Deep Strike special rule, and there's usually other things associated with what happens when they come as well. The last type is a Witchfire psychic power. Witchfires are essentially psychic shooting attacks, and they act almost always like a weapon would in the psychic phase, or in the shooting phase. However, this does break down into 4 subcategories. The first one being just regular Witchfires, which typically have profiles just like weapons. They'll have a range, a strength, an armor penetration value, and a type such as Assault 4 or Assault 2 to tell you how many dice you've rolled to hit. However, there are some psychic powers that are Witchfires that do not have a specific weapon profile, such as Psychic Shriek. These ones are a little confusing. The rulebook isn't clear how you're supposed to handle these when rolling to hit, but the general consensus of most gamers in most tournaments is that in order for these to generate, after they successfully manifest, you have to roll a single to hit successfully for the power to manifest. Otherwise, the power does not work. Now, you're going to hear some people disagree with that, and that's fine. It's not 100% clear in the rulebook, but the general consensus of all the major tournaments out there is that you then roll a single roll to hit before they can manifest. All the other ones are very clear. They'll say Assault 4 or Assault 2, so you roll 4 dice or 2 dice. Or it'll say it's a flamer, so you use a template. It is usually pretty clear that way. Another type of Witchfire is called the Focused Witchfire. The Focused Witchfire works differently in that if you roll more warp charges than is required, then you actually get to pick who gets hit with it. So if it's a warp charge 1 and you get 2 successful rolls in your warp charges and then it does not get denied, you could say, I want to hit the guy in the back, where normally you have to hit the nearest one. A Focused Witchfire will just hit the nearest one if you don't get more than what it requires for warp charges. Another type is a Beam Witchfire. This one works as a straight line within whatever the length is, so it might be 12 inches or 8 inches or 18 inches or 24 inches, and everything under the line gets hit with whatever the strength and AP or whatever effects the power says it'll have. And lastly, we have the Nova power, which is generally range 6 inches or 9 inches or 12 inches, and every enemy unit within that range of the Psyker will suffer the effects of that Witchfire. It's very powerful, especially when you're surrounded by a lot of enemies. That's pretty much everything you need to get started with a psychic phase. Now, the big thing is that you need to go out and learn all the different psychic powers that your particular race or army can use, so you can figure out what combination will work best for you. It is random, so you don't always get what you want, but there are ways to work around that. So, at this point, I have a demonstration of more of the psychic phase in our next battle report at the link below. We'll have a battle between multiple psychers on both sides so that you can really see all the different interactions between generating warp charges and denying the witch and manifesting different powers. So go ahead and click the link below. Now, it is for MiniWarGaming Vault members. If you're still not yet a Vault member, it's okay. You can still click the link, get a free 7-day trial to the MiniWarGaming Vault, and get access to this battle report, as well as the ones from the previous How to Play Warhammer 40k tutorials, as well as the thousands of other painting tutorials, battle reports, behind the scenes, and everything else. It'll help to support us to make more of these videos. The Vault members are how we survive. It is not through advertising revenue, it is through our Vault members that we are able to continue doing this. If you're already a Vault member, if you've already signed up by watching this, thank you so much for your patronage. Thank you for helping us to be able to do this. So go ahead, click the link below to watch the next battle report, and stay tuned for the next How to Play Warhammer 40k 7th edition. Happy Wargaming.